Hello and welcome to the Christian Study Abroad podcast. My name is Greg Belgum, and I serve as the Vice President here at Living and Learning International, as well as the Chair of the Christian Study Abroad Conference. And today I'm joined by a guest, Dr. Cynthia Slagter. She has been at Calvin University for almost 30 years and serves as the Director of Off-Campus Programs. She's also a professor of Spanish, and in her time at Calvin has spent many, many trips to Spain and to other parts of the world in her role both as a professor and as the director of off-campus programs. So, Dr. Slagter, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast, and excited to jump into a conversation today.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, Cynthia, would you tell us a little bit about your professional journey to kind of arrive in the role that you're at? And then after that, we'll jump into some research findings that you did this last year.
Certainly. Yes, I spent most of my career as a professor of Spanish here at Calvin, then Calvin College, now Calvin University. And in that capacity, I was privileged to serve as director of semester programs abroad 7 times. So I've spent lots of time with students abroad, and then multiple short-term programs as well. Then right at COVID time, I transitioned into my current role as director of off-campus programs. So as you can imagine, it was a bit of a baptism by fire to jump into that role in the year when the first major job I did was pull all of our students back home from study abroad. So it's only gotten better since then.
That's great. Yeah, if you start at a low, then it's all uphill. So that's wonderful.
That's right.
Well, this last year, you presented at Abilene Christian University. They were hosting the Best Practices in Christian Higher Education conference. It was their second time running that conference, but this particular year in 2024 was an emphasis on study abroad and global education. But prior to the 2024 conference, you'd been part of a research cohort. And so can you tell us a little bit about what your research project was, what you selected, and then why was that topic important?
Yes, it was a great opportunity to work with other Christian study abroad professionals. We were all encouraged to look for a project that would help inform our own offices and to help us grow. And one of the big challenges that I faced here in my office was, how do we assess our work? There is a quote somewhere that says, without looking at our learning outcomes, we could say that that study abroad is merely tourism with a college course number attached.
Mm-hmm.
And we really wanted to make sure we were not that. I constantly want to say that we are study abroad. We're not just tourism. So then I wanted to think about assessment. How do we know that what we're doing is effective? So assessment, of course, is kind of a buzzword in the academy now. It's so important for so many people. But assessment, in order to do good assessment, you have to, first of all, have program outcomes. You have to have learning outcomes. And hopefully your learning outcomes will also align with your institution. So I'm very fortunate. I have an off-campus programs committee, and we worked very hard to develop 4 program learning outcomes that align directly with our university's educational framework, which has 4 areas as well. And of those 4 areas, so our areas are faith, learning, vocation, and citizenship. So my program learning outcomes for all of our off-campus programs are centered on those 4 points. For this project, I clearly could not assess all of those things. So I selected faith. And I sometimes wondered why I chose the most difficult one first.
Sure.
Because, of course, assessing a faith outcome is just really, really tricky. And I found that it was really challenging. So our faith learning outcome says that a student will be able to describe how their own faith is impacted by the program experience in light of local norms and beliefs. That's what we set up for. We did not say a student will come to the Lord in our program. Certainly not a measurable outcome, or even, I think, a desirable program learning objective. So we hope that students will be able to, as I said, describe their own faith. I think for many students, their faith is something they have simply grown up with, and that's quite challenging for them to do that kind of self-examination. And then, of course, we want them to do that in their study abroad context. How do those things meet. So that's the project.
Okay.
Let's
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. And so one of the things that I observe as you describe that learning outcome, um, I think there's a lot of spiritual formation and growth, spiritual growth that can happen
Mhm.
through anybody's life journey. But what is unique about study abroad and global education as a means for growth? And so here in the second part of the outcome, you say in light of local norms and beliefs. So it's critical to attach it not just to to the actual program itself. Could you maybe describe how did you guys kind of land on that piece and that phrasing there specifically?
So young people, college age people, of course, are in that stage of faith development, and that is vital to what we were thinking. I think this is the point in their lives that their faith is becoming their own. This is not their parents' faith anymore. This is their own faith. And this is the point where they are asking questions about it. And I think that we say so for so many cultural things, you don't know about the water you swim in, the air you breathe until you go someplace else.
Hmm.
So it is that going abroad, the challenges of going abroad, the difficulties of going abroad, but also seeing things outside of your normal community when you suddenly have a little bit of distance, I think, to look at your own faith and to make decisions about your own faith. This is a little bit of a scary time, I suppose. But I think, as in so many things, it's when you're at that edge, when you're in that moment of tension, that decisions are made and there's the greatest impact. So study abroad is one of those moments. It's that high impact moment when an examination of the things that are important to you is especially appropriate.
Hmm.
And we really appreciate that how students will have those kind of opportunities while they are abroad. It was interesting to us as we get into the data a little bit more. Um, it was tricky for us to get beyond surface things with students to try and get at this. As you can imagine, the joke always is Jesus is the answer to all the questions.
Right.
And we wanted to get beyond that. And it did take a few iterations of this study before I think we were able to reach some more interesting conclusions or observations, perhaps.
Sure. Well, maybe that's a good transition. Tell us a bit about the study, the assessment. So we understand the outcomes and the four that are important to your office that you guys have determined. This study looked specifically at one of the four on faith as an outcome. So how did you go about building an assessment tool?
So we basically had two or three components of this. We did a survey. Surveys are only of moderate help, and this one, true, was only of moderate help. We did a multiple choice Likert scale type of survey asking them about their activities during their study abroad. Did they attend worship service? Did they participate in a Bible study? Did they engage in personal devotions, pray regularly? And so they could simply check those things off. And I think the results were not particularly startling in that. The vast majority of students did attend worship. They did participate in Bible studies and personal devotions. Um, on the Likert scale questions, we asked them about their observation and their participation in local faith traditions. So, did they learn about them? Did they observe them? Did they then have structured opportunities to consider their own beliefs in light of local norms and beliefs? So, this is where our study abroad leadership is vitally important. This is what I think distinguishes a Christian study abroad
Mm,
program from
mm,
a non Christian study abroad program. Our students in a Christian study abroad program have an opportunity with other students of faith and with a leader of faith to examine what they are thinking, what they're experiencing, what they are observing in the culture. And so that was very important to us to see, were they getting that and were they recognizing that they were getting that in some cases. Um, so I think that was very important to me, that there are structured opportunities to consider their own beliefs in light of local beliefs. And this is something I think in most cases, a student would not be able to do on their own. This
Sure.
really is where you want a good leader.
Hmm. Yeah, a guide who's been there before, who can say, "Hey, this disorienting nature that you're feeling is normal, and it's
Yes,
okay. And like, let's sit in it for a little bit, but let's not stay here. Let's like move
exactly.
through." So
Mhm.
yeah, that's super critical. We could go down a lot of rabbit holes, and I have so many questions. But can you keep going? So the assessment was the survey, was the Likert scale. What else was a part of the assessment?
So then we had an essay prompt. And the essay prompt also had to go through a few stages. So our essay prompt, we asked them then to describe how their own faith is impacted. But so we started them off saying, consider your own faiths or belief system. At least at our university, while although most of our students are Christians, not all of our students are Christians. So we did talk about a faith or a belief system when we were doing this. Uh, but then we asked them what elements of this belief system have been challenged by your off campus experience. And we wanted to get at both in class and out of class because again, our programs are Christian programs. So we hope that it's not just their experiences out of class attending a church service, but actually what they are learning in
Mhm.
class as well. How have your beliefs been challenged? What has taken on greater meaning, greater significance, greater importance to you was also very important. Not just the challenges, but also the things that they had learned from that. And the answers we got initially to this, I was a bit disappointed, to be perfectly honest.
Mm-hmm.
Um, they were a little bit trite,
Sure.
for lack of a better word. I learned to trust in God. Well,
Hmm.
not to say that that's bad, but yeah,
Right.
that's not
Right.
helping us know how to do anything more for them. It was I could see how God was working in other countries. Those are all good things, but it wasn't really helping me very much to know how we could structure a program differently or better. So then we added to that. We asked students to connect their reflections to one or two specific
Mm.
events or experiences, hoping that this would make students dive a little more deeply into what they were doing. So then what started to come out was specific experiences. Many students mentioned their Bible studies again. So it was their interaction with one another, which was great to hear. The students who lived with host families often would mention the importance of the connection with a host family. Um, Another important thing to learn about. But then we were not hearing anything about their classes. So we're starting to think, okay, what are we doing here? So yet another tweak on that prompt where we said, please provide concrete examples of critical connections between your course content and your experiences, your growth, and your development. And this is where we started getting some really interesting responses. I have to also thank my colleague, one of my colleagues who was leading a course, that he made this part of their take home essay. So the students had time to think about this, to do a little bit better writing on this. And this is where we started to see things, specific mentions about elements of the course that were connecting to their experiences. And they were started talking about their readings, how their readings let them prepare for some of their experiences and then on their way back after these experiences, particularly cultural excursions. That started to be really rich. Um, and what we found, perhaps surprisingly, the students resonated most with the challenging experiences, what is sometimes called dark tourism. The students on our program in Hungary, their first cultural excursion is to Auschwitz. So
Mm.
it's just a really hard thing to do. Their second cultural excursion is to Serbia and Bosnia. So they examine the Balkan War. And they are centered in Budapest, which is a post communist society. These students for the first time for many of them, really have to struggle with, where is God in the face of evil?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm so grateful that they were able to struggle with our Calvin leader. And they, with good readings, with good discussions, and again in their essays, it came out how formative this kind of experience was for them. It wasn't just a tourist visit with, you take the photos in front of the Eiffel Tower. This was, what is happening in the world? Where is God in the world? Where am I in this world? How is this changing how I'm going to be a person when I get back?
Right.
So that
Wow.
was really, really,
Yeah.
it was amazing.
When I think about the message of the gospel, the power of what Christ did on the cross is only as powerful as our understanding of the depravity of our sin. And so if those things aren't too distant from each other, then the work on the cross isn't that significant. But if we see the
Mhm.
depravity of humanity and how ugly sin is and how destructive it can be, we can realize, like, whoa, okay, actually the work on the cross is really, really important. But yeah, to your point again about the important nature of having a guide, a professor, a leader along the way, you're not going to just get stuck or sit in that on your
Mhm.
own, and be lost to just the wickedness of the world, but actually can see, yeah, through that. So yeah, that's remarkable. And I don't want to put you on the spot, but are any of those readings in particular? Do you have any of those that you might recommend, or from that context?
Actually, my former colleague, and that I think many people who listen to this podcast might be acquainted with, Don DeGraff.
Mm-hmm.
He wrote the textbook There and Back, and he has chapters, two chapters in his book. One is called Experiencing Thin and Dark Places, and that really goes right to the heart of that kind of thing. And another one is Living in the Middle. A little bit what I was saying before, too, that idea of living in the tensions. Um, I think that many of us who've worked in the study abroad field are aware of how that liminal experience for students, they are no longer home, but often in their new study place, they are not home there yet either. But that feeling of liminality, that feeling of in-betweenness is unsettling without a doubt, but it also is the growing edge. So I think his Living in the Middle chapter hits some of that as well. So I would highly recommend that as well.
Okay. Thank
So,
you. Thank you for that. Well,
mhm.
for those listening on the podcast, we'll include that a link to that text in the show notes. Um, okay, to keep us kind of rolling. So you mentioned outcomes. We talked about the assessment of the faith outcome. You talked about surveys, multiple choice around activities. We
Mhm.
talked about a Likert scale, and we talked about the essay prompt. Um,
Mhm.
was there more to the assessment, or were those the building blocks of the assessment?
That was really the building blocks. What I would have liked to have done, there's always that when you do a
Sure.
project too. I had hoped to do more interviews, personal interviews with students after they returned, but they just ran out of time for that. In a previous project on a previous topic, I found that actually was very rich. In that, I had a student assistant who interviewed and recorded students, and we found that in the recordings, there were often much more revealing than what students write.
Mm,
They are a little bit freer in what they say. And later on, when you just transcribe those and you can code that kind of response, you can get some really interesting things. So, if there's someone out there who wants to do stage 2 of this report,
mhm.
I'd be happy to consult on that. But I think in a conversation, some things may come out a little bit better than in a written response. There's always a little bit of an element of stagedness, I think, perhaps in a written response. Although I was really pleased with what we were able to gather.
Right. Which anecdotally, talking to students, you hear students say things like, "This semester changed my life. I've never
Mhm.
experienced Christian community or Christian hospitality like I did during study abroad, or I've
Exactly.
I've never experienced, you know, what discipleship or some of these pieces that they articulate through
Hmm.
testimony in conversation. But to
Yes.
do the work that you're talking about here around assessment, we really do need to record those things and have it
Yes.
done in a way of, like, did I just talk to the three standout students, or is this actually representative kind of the
Mhm.
whole?
Yeah.
So that's please, for those listening, take Dr. Slagter up on that offer to do part two. We would love to see that
Mhm.
research done. That would be wonderful. Okay, so you talked a little bit about some of the findings and really the emphasis through the essays that some of the dark experiences, the challenging experiences, is where a lot of growth happened. Any other findings, and in what ways did those findings inform program design choices?
So I would think, as some of them are not surprising, I think they confirm what we know. That idea of community, as you said, community with other students, and particularly in Bible studies. For some of our programs, that it's a bit problematic sometimes. We really want students to form a strong community with one another. Um, if you're doing a language study abroad program, that can be a little bit trickier because we want them to be interacting with locals in the host language and the target language. So that can be a little tricky. So I found a tension in some of the programs for that. But building community, we know it's important, but as much as possible to try and build that community before you go, building expectations before you go. I think that can be really important. We do have an advantage in the programs that I was working with. They were Calvin programs with Calvin students. So
Mm,
were able to do an orientation, fairly thorough orientation before they left. I think for some other programs where students are coming from a lot of different places, it's trickier.
sure.
Although with the technology we have these days, I think it is still definitely a possibility that you can begin forming a group, forming the expectations for your group as well before they depart. And I think don't shy away from hard experiences as long as those hard experiences are processed in class, pre and post experience. So important. And I think almost any place that you're studying, you will be having important topics to study with students. Students are, I think, really hungry for that kind of learning. They want to go deeper than taking pictures in front of the monuments. Students really appreciate when they do hard things.
Right.
Um, So I would encourage anyone who is planning a program to look at how can they do that? How can they build something like that in with students? Again, give them an on-ramp and an off-ramp. Don't have them just stay there in the hard place, but students love those experiences.
They do. Yeah. The often it's sometimes it's the what they have in their imagination, maybe from pop culture or from media or from friends they've seen go
Mhm.
abroad, that gets them mobilized to go. But it's rarely the thing that they point back to and said, "Man, the best part of my experience was that photo or that moment in front of the thing
Exactly.
where there was 1,000 other tourists." It's often those intimate moments in community. It's the hard experiences that you're talking about
Mhm.
that have been processed. So that's really rich. You mentioned language programs. There's a little bit of
Mm.
challenge there, and I wonder if there's a bit of trade off that as a language professor yourself that you kind of have to make to say, okay, if language learning and language acquisition is a primary goal of a language program, um, that may inform how people are engaging in community with people of their heart language, their native language. How have you seen that play out and how do you kind of make those choices as somebody who's really trying to drive both outcomes, language learning and faith formation? Yeah, how do you see that interplay?
I referred briefly earlier to my another study that I did with interviews and such, and it was on language acquisition during study abroad. Briefly, then, I would say in this kind of context, we really want to work on scaffolding them. So we're going to give them the building blocks, the tools to talk about these hard issues. So if you were doing something like that, maybe you're going to talk about the Spanish Civil War and the Pact of Forgetting in Spain. It's a huge topic. How do we look at forgiveness and redemption and all of those themes? Well, students, your average student is not going to come off the street able to talk about those things in the target language. But again, with some scaffolding, with some work on these are the kinds of structures that we're going to have. Let's practice these structures and let's make it practical. You want to know why you need to be able to use the subjunctive? Because you want to express doubt and uncertainty as you're talking about these kinds of topics. I think it can make grammatical topics actually suddenly much more relevant. Oh, this is why we have this in the language, so that we can talk about these kinds of things. So I consider it actually kind of a fun challenge to give the students the tools to watch them use those tools, and then to really realize that they can go and do much more than they thought they could in the target language as well.
Sure. No,
So
that makes sense. That and being thoughtful that these things aren't isolated from each other. Language learning over here, and maybe spiritual formation and Bible study and community and church over here. That these things can be woven together. Is at least that's what I'm hearing.
absolutely, integration of faith and learning is I think what we're all about.
Right.
So we
Right.
want to integrate this into every kind of assignment that we give. So yeah, to be able to talk about these kinds of topics is certainly a higher level skill. Even in English, students are not necessarily ready to do that. But we can give students the tools. I think that is our job as educators, to give students the tools to do these things for themselves.
Sure.
And as they accomplish these things, they also, I think there's so much more ownership of it when they're able to
Um,
do that.
to kind of turn the conversation here a little bit, some of our audience, I think a decent amount of our audience, are people who are sitting in a seat at a Christian college or university responsible for advising students studying abroad.
Mm.
And the people in those seats have a whole range of experience, both professionally and lived experience. And maybe at a baseline, a function of that job is to successfully advise students to study abroad and get them into the right program and deal with all the logistics and the forms and the paperwork. And sometimes we can kind of get caught up in the administration of that
Absolutely.
role. And a lot of what I'm hopeful that people are hearing today is that there is more to what study abroad is than simply getting students on an airplane successfully and then assuming that this experience will take place. So, I'm putting you on the spot a little bit again. Do you have any kind of advice or anything you might share with somebody who's an emerging professional who has a desire to work in Christian higher ed, in global education for a long time? But maybe they're kind of caught up in the just the administrative day to day, but they want to integrate something of more substance, some of what we're talking about here. How can they, and maybe let me round out the question in a way that's more precise. How should they go about thinking through portfolio management? That's maybe one specific thing. The opportunities that they're offering to their students, whether those are third party providers, whether those are their own programs. How should they go about reviewing programs that they might offer to their students? Because they are tasked with making the selection of what options are available to their students. How maybe at that moment should some of these things inform their thinking?
That's a hard one. You asked me a big question there. Especially with third party providers, it's tricky because it is so much out of the control of the person who's sending them abroad. I would hope that every institution would have at least some wrap for that study abroad, a really strong orientation and a really strong post program. Um, Ideally, you would have perhaps a credit bearing course that would go alongside your study abroad, perhaps only one credit, but something so that you have a check in moment with those students. Um, and I think, again, thinking about building that scaffold around, building some critical questions before they go. Think about these things before you go. Midpoint. So did you think about those things? How does that work with where you've been? And at the end, to return to them. I'm a firm believer in spiraling on
Mm.
with any sort of pedagogical. So spiral and come back to a topic, come back to a topic. So I would say look for a place where students will go beyond the tour. I have nothing against going to the Eiffel Tower. Go to the Eiffel Tower, but do more than that,
Right. Right.
right? Um, Another colleague of mine has an assignment that she does throughout the semester, and it's called My Place in Location. Um, and students have to, so let's say they are studying in Paris, My Place in Paris, that every week they return to the same place. And for the 12 or 15 weeks of the semester, they observe that place from a different perspective. They do something
Mm,
different with that place. It's to get deeper into that place. I think it's like the verse in the Bible that says, "You are where you are, you should plant and you should harvest and you should develop roots and work for the flourishing of the city." So
mm,
wherever the students are, they should try to sink in a little bit. And by having this place that they return to every week, we hope that our students who are studying abroad, perhaps their parents will come visit them and they'll say, "Come, let me take you to my place in Paris. It's this little bench in a corner of a park where I go every Wednesday." Or it's a little cafe or something. It will give some structure. It will make them part of the place they are studying and more than a tourist. So I would look for programs that will give students an opportunity to go beyond that tourism, to go beyond, as I started out saying, that this is not tourism with a course number attached.
right. Yeah. Okay. No, that's helpful. That is really helpful. Both the wrap, what can you as somebody leading at a college or university do before and after, and then what programs go beyond. My takeaway for today is I don't think you need to go abroad to have your place in your city.
No.
So for you in Grand Rapids, where is your place? For me here in California, where is my place? I think I want to go find a place for myself.
Mhm.
That feels like a really meaningful exercise that doesn't have to be isolated just to study
No,
abroad.
absolutely not. Absolutely not. But
So,
we do love to have that for our students. I think that one of the things that I fight against, particularly in European settings, our students have that tendency of trying to travel every weekend,
yep.
and we want to pull them back. We want to pull them back to develop roots.
Yeah.
So,
That's good. That's really good. Well, thank you so much for time today, for conversation. I hope that those listening are encouraged both by your study and that the work of assessment is really, really important. We set out to do something. Are we doing that thing that we set out to do? And so, whether it's faith formation assessment or any other type of learning outcome. So, thank you so much. And yeah, good to chat with you today.
it's been a pleasure. Thank you very much.